Eastport is the town where the tide does the hiring. At the edge of the Gulf of Maine, the water doesn't just rise and fall, it swings like a pendulum loaded with money. The town sits on Moose Island, where the tides lock in the highest range in the continental United States, some days over 20 feet. That's not scenery, that's a payroll condition. And for a while, the fish that followed these tides made Eastport one of the busiest ports in the country. The sardine industry fed more than kitchens. It fed whole streets, whole schools, whole generations of families who learned to time their lives to the push and pull of the water. Then the sea got overfished. The snacks changed. The processors consolidated, and the canneries shut down or burned down. The town shrank so far it now feels like a time capsule with a zip code. But the arts came in. The tides still moves. And the easternmost city in the United States keeps insisting that time is not up just because the canned fish is gone. This is Drive-Thru Towns. I'm your host, Andrew Wilcox. If you're just driving past it, Eastport looks like a place that forgot the 21st century to be here for high tide. The Pamisquoti Bay waterfront still has that working waterfront look. Sturdy docks, weathered buildings, and a harbor that actually does something. The town is small, but it carries the posture of somewhere that used to be a major port and refuses to apologize for it. From the road, the story reads like a polite postcard. Cape houses, gray paint, blue water, memorial hall, the Tides Institute and Museum of Art. The old canneries are either gone or wearing the quiet dignity of empty buildings. The town is not loud, it's calibrated. Eastport's boom was not theoretical. It was oily and salty and loud. By the late 1800s, the town had become the sardine canning capital of the world. The industry was born when Eastport followed the Atlantic herring, what they called the silver darlings, into the can. The first local sardine factory appeared around 1875. By 1886, there were 13 canneries lining the waterfront, hiring about 800 people, men, women, and children, to work day and night during the season. The town packed thousands of cases a week, and the smell of fish and salt dominated daily life. At its peak, Eastport had as many as 18 canneries, and the town's population swelled toward 5,000. The canneries were the town's engine. The fish came in by the haul. The cans went out by the train. The money came in by the season, and the town's economy flipped like a tide chart. Busy, then quiet, then busy again. And that's the thing that matters the most. The sardine business was not a side project. It was the town. Women's hands became legendary in their trade for their nimble fingers at packing. Families, neighborhoods, and social life all organized around shift work and the rhythm of the catch. Eastport is here because of the tides. That's the geographic fact and the economic joke in one. The 15th century Maliseet and Pamisquoti were already harvesting herring in these waters long before European settlers. The modern industry picked up where indigenous practice left off, only with more steel, more cans, and more capital. The tides keep rising and falling by as much as 25 feet, and the bay's channels and currents created a perfect trap for the species that followed water movement. The town's highest elevation barely clears 10 feet above sea level, which means the difference between high and low doesn't just rearrange the water line, it rearranges the town's access to itself. Dock at low tide and you're walking on rocks. Dock at high tide and you're stepping into a harbor that looks like it was built for a different world. Eastport is not simply by sea. It's a conversation with the sea, and the sea almost always has the last word. The existential industry at Eastport for a long, long time was the sardine. The town's identity, its architecture, its social life, it all came pre salted. The smell of the canneries, the grease on the piers, the clockwork of the season defined the town's character. Herring, not politics, set the calendar. The town's culture still carries that imprint. The old American Can Company building, with its massive brick walls and industrial silhouette, sits at the edge of the bay as one of the last architectural witnesses to the heyday. The Eastport Arts Center occupies a building that once vibrated with the noise of machinery, and the town's museum and galleries now talk about the sea in paint and glass instead of cans. That's the shift. The town hasn't lost its rhythm. It just sort of changed its keys. The sardines are gone, but the water is still there. The shrink didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, and it was written in discard and consolidation. Overfishing, changing tastes on the snack shelf, the rise of processed foods that didn't need small, oily fish, the closure of individual canneries, the fires that burned some of the others, the consolidation of the food industry into a smaller number of larger plants elsewhere. The town watched its industrial identity leak away year by year. And Eastport went from being a major port, once second in U.S. trade by some accounts, to a town that barely registers on the national map. Its population is a fraction of what it was during the herring time. The canneries that didn't burn closed. The buildings stood empty or half used, and the town began to look like a place where the ocean had taken back its investment. The ghost of Eastport is not a single figure. It's a workforce that still lives in the town's memory. The women who worked the canning lines, the men who pulled the nets, the children who grew up smelling like the sea every night. The town's current arts community is not a replacement, it's a response. The painters, musicians, writers, and performers who live in Eastport now are not replicating the canneries. They're inserting a different kind of energy into the same streets. The town is still the easternmost city in the United States, and that title is more than a gimmick. It's a geographic punchline the town keeps using. The Tides Institute, the Museum of Art, the Eastport Art Center, and the general sense that the town is a magnet for artists, all sitting on the bones of the old sardine industry. The buildings are the same. The economic language is just different. The tide is the only thing that hasn't learned to negotiate. Eastport is a very American story because it shows how a place can be eaten by the very thing that fed it. The town grew rich on the herring, then got exhausted by the seas being stripped of the resource. The town's identity was built on the assumption that the water would keep giving and the town would keep working, and then the assumption cracked. The town didn't move. The fish did. The market did. The world did. The same is true now. The town now depends on the sea, not for food, but for symbolism and tourism and inspiration. The water is still the landlord. The town is just paying its rent in a different currency. So if you drive through Eastport, don't let the quiet fool you. This is the town where the tide once moved the wealth of the sea, where the air used to reek with fish, and the streets used to be full of people who lived by the shift whistle, where the canneries once lined the waterfront like a declaration of industry. Now, the artists live in the old buildings. The tourists walk the same streets. The tides still come in like a clock that knows no mercy. The town is smaller, quieter, older, but still there. And every time the tide drops, the town reminds itself that it has always been temporary, built on the assumption that the water would stay useful and still standing, in part because of the stubborn human habit of believing the next tide might also bring something new. This has been Drive-Thru Towns. I'm your host, Andrew Wilcox. A special thanks to Chloe Jones for providing our music. If you enjoyed this journey, please follow the podcast to stay updated on all our upcoming episodes. To keep the conversation going, you can connect with me on Instagram at 50 State Family. Find me on LinkedIn under Wilcox Legal, or reach out directly via email at wilcoxlegal@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next road.
'Cause I was wandering free on an American dream, with a million things to see and do. But it's all good, I'm fine. Had the time of my life, 'cause I did it all. We